Boring Sleeping History, The Crimson Eagle, a saga of the Roman Empire. The story of Rome begins not with a bang, but with a whisper, a myth woven into the very fabric of its identity. It is a tale of twin brothers Romulus and Remus, descendants of the Trojan hero Aeneas, cast adrift on the Tiber River and suckled by a she-wolf. This foundational myth of divine ancestry and a fierce, almost feral beginning would echo through the centuries, a testament to the Roman spirit of resilience and destiny. While the legend is a poetic invention, the reality was no less remarkable. In the 8th century BC, a collection of small Latin villages on the hills overlooking the Tiber consolidated, forming a settlement that would one day rule the known world. Early Rome was a monarchy, ruled by a succession of 7 kings, a period shrouded in a mix of legend and historical fact. These kings, from the legendary Romulus to the tyrannical Tarquinius Superbus, laid the groundwork for Roman society, establishing religious customs, military traditions, and political institutions. But the Roman character, fiercely independent and wary of absolute power, bristled under the yoke of monarchy. In 509 BC, the last king was overthrown, and the Roman Republic was born. This was a radical experiment in governance, a system designed to prevent the concentration of power in a single individual. The watchword was libertas, liberty, and it would be the guiding principle of the Republic for nearly 5 centuries. The Republic was a complex tapestry of political and social structures. At its heart was the Senate, an advisory council of elder statesmen, the patres or fathers of Rome. In theory, their power was limited, but in practice their influence was immense, guiding foreign policy, controlling finances, and shaping legislation. Executive power was vested in 2 consuls, elected annually, who held equal authority and could veto each other's actions, a brilliant check on ambition. The people, the plebeians, were represented by assemblies and tribunes, who had the power to propose laws and protect the common citizen from the excesses of the patrician elite. This delicate balance of power, though often tested by social strife and political rivalry, was the engine of Roman expansion. The early Republic was a period of constant struggle. Rome was just one of many city-states on the Italian peninsula, and its early history was a relentless series of wars against its neighbours, the Etruscans, the Sabines, the Samnites. These were not grand wars of imperial conquest, but brutal, attritional conflicts for survival and regional dominance. It was in these unforgiving crucibles of war that the Roman military machine was forged. The legion, a highly organized and disciplined fighting force, became the most effective army of the ancient world. The Roman soldier was not a conscript, but a citizen farmer, fighting for his land, his family, and his republic. This deep-seated patriotism, combined with rigorous training and tactical flexibility, made the Roman legion a formidable and resilient force. One of the defining conflicts of the early Republic was the struggle against the Greek city of Tarentum and its formidable ally Pyrrhus of Epirus. Pyrrhus, a brilliant Hellenistic general, brought with him war elephants, terrifying beasts that the Romans had never before encountered. He defeated the Romans in 2 major battles, but his losses were so great that he famously exclaimed, "One more such victory, and we are lost." This Pyrrhic victory became a byword for a success gained at too high a cost. Ultimately, the Romans' superior manpower and unwavering resolve wore Pyrrhus down, and he was forced to abandon his Italian campaign. Rome's victory over Pyrrhus established it as the dominant power in Italy and set the stage for its first great international conflict, the Punic Wars. The Punic Wars were a series of 3 epic struggles against Carthage, a powerful maritime empire based in modern-day Tunisia. This was a clash of titans, a conflict that would determine the fate of the Mediterranean. The First Punic War was primarily a naval conflict, as Rome, a land-based power, was forced to build a navy from scratch to challenge Carthaginian sea power. After a long and grueling war, Rome emerged victorious, gaining control of Sicily and Sardinia, but the peace was short-lived. In the Second Punic War, Carthage unleashed one of the greatest military geniuses in history, Hannibal Barca. In one of the most audacious military campaigns ever undertaken, Hannibal marched his army, complete with war elephants, from Spain over the Pyrenees and the Alps and into the heart of Italy. For over a decade, Hannibal rampaged through the Italian countryside, inflicting a series of devastating defeats on the Romans, most famously at the Battle of Cannae, where he annihilated a Roman army twice the size of his own. Rome was on the brink of collapse, but it refused to break. In its darkest hour, Rome turned to a new generation of leaders, most notably Quintus Fabius Maximus, who adopted a strategy of attrition, shadowing Hannibal's army and avoiding a decisive battle, earning him the nickname the Conctator, the Delayer. While Fabius's tactics were unpopular, they saved Rome from immediate destruction. The tide finally turned with the emergence of Publius Cornelius Scipio, a young general who had studied Hannibal's tactics. Instead of confronting Hannibal in Italy, Scipio took the audacious step of invading North Africa, forcing Carthage to recall Hannibal to defend his homeland. At the Battle of Zama, Scipio defeated Hannibal, ending the Second Punic War and establishing Rome as the undisputed master of the Western Mediterranean. The Third Punic War was a brutal and unnecessary postscript, driven by a deep-seated Roman fear and hatred of Carthage. The city was besieged, captured, and utterly destroyed. The ground was sown with salt, a symbolic act to ensure that it would never rise again. The conquest of the Mediterranean transformed Rome. The influx of wealth, slaves, and new ideas from the conquered territories created immense social and economic upheaval. The traditional Roman values of austerity, discipline, and piety began to erode, replaced by a growing taste for luxury, extravagance, and individualism. The small-scale citizen farmer, the backbone of the early republic, was driven off the land by the rise of vast, slave-worked estates, known as latifundia. These displaced farmers flocked to Rome, creating a volatile and impoverished urban proletariat. The political system, designed for a small city-state, struggled to cope with the demands of a vast and complex empire. The Senate became a battleground for ambitious and powerful individuals who used their wealth and military commands to build personal power bases. The old checks and balances began to break down, and the Republic was plunged into a century of political violence and civil war. The first cracks in the Republic's foundation appeared with the Gracchi brothers, Tiberius and Gaius. These two aristocrats, champions of the plebeian cause, attempted to introduce land reforms to address the growing inequality. Their efforts were met with violent opposition from the senatorial elite, and both brothers were assassinated. Their deaths marked a turning point in Roman politics, the moment when political violence became a tool for resolving disputes. The late Republic was dominated by a series of larger-than-life figures, military strongmen who commanded the personal loyalty of their legions. Gaius Marius, a new man who rose through the ranks of the army, reformed the legions, opening them to the landless poor and creating a professional, standing army that was more loyal to its general than to the state. This innovation, while militarily effective, had profound and dangerous political consequences. Marius's rivalry with Lucius Cornelius Sulla, a ruthless and ambitious aristocrat, plunged Rome into its first full-scale civil war. Sulla emerged victorious and, in a terrifying precedent, declared himself dictator, unleashing a bloody purge of his political enemies. Though he eventually retired, Sulla's example demonstrated that the Republic could be overthrown by a powerful general with a loyal army. The stage was now set for the final act of the Roman Republic, a drama of ambition, betrayal, and civil war that would be dominated by three men: Pompey the Great, a brilliant general who had won a string of victories in the East; Marcus Licinius Crassus, the richest man in Rome, who had crushed the slave revolt led by Spartacus; and a rising star in the political firmament, a man of immense charisma, ambition, and political genius, Gaius Julius Caesar. These three men would form the first triumvirate, an informal alliance that would dominate Roman politics and ultimately tear the Republic apart. The age of the Republic was drawing to a bloody and dramatic close, and a new era, the Age of Emperors, was about to dawn. The crossing of the Rubicon in 49 BC was an act of treason, a declaration of war against the Senate and the Roman Republic. The phrase alea iacta est, the die is cast, has echoed through history as a symbol of an irrevocable decision. For Caesar, there was no turning back. His rival Pompey and the majority of the Senate, caught off guard by the speed of Caesar's advance, abandoned Rome and fled to Greece to raise an army. Caesar marched into Rome unopposed, the master of Italy. The civil war that followed was a global conflict, fought across the length and breadth of the Roman world. Caesar, outnumbered but possessing a battle-hardened and fanatically loyal army, pursued Pompey to Greece. At the Battle of Pharsalus, in a stunning display of tactical genius, Caesar decisively defeated Pompey's much larger army. Pompey fled to Egypt, seeking refuge, but was assassinated on the orders of the young king Ptolemy XIII, who hoped to curry favor with Caesar. Caesar, upon being presented with Pompey's head, is said to have wept, a complex reaction of grief for his former son-in-law and ally, and disgust at the treachery of his murder. Caesar's time in Egypt is the stuff of legend. He became embroiled in a dynastic struggle between Ptolemy XIII and his sister Cleopatra. Famously, Cleopatra had herself smuggled into Caesar's presence wrapped in a carpet, and the two became lovers. Caesar defeated Ptolemy's forces and installed Cleopatra on the throne of Egypt. Their affair was both a political alliance and a genuine romance, and it produced a son, Caesarion. After solidifying his position in the east, Caesar returned to Rome to deal with the remnants of the Pompeian faction. He crushed their forces in Africa and Spain in a series of swift and brutal campaigns. By 45 BC, the civil war was over. Caesar was the undisputed master of the Roman world. He returned to Rome in triumph, and the Senate, now a mere rubber stamp for his will, showered him with honors. He was made dictator for 10 years, and then for life. He embarked on an ambitious program of reforms, tackling debt, reforming the calendar, creating the Julian calendar which we still use in a modified form today, and launching massive public works projects. He was a populist and an autocrat, a man who seemed to genuinely care for the welfare of the common people, but who had no patience for the traditions and institutions of the Republic. But Caesar's accumulation of power and his increasingly monarchical style aroused deep suspicion and fear among the traditional Roman aristocracy. A conspiracy was formed, led by Marcus Junius Brutus and Gaius Cassius Longinus. They saw themselves as liberators, acting to save the Republic from a tyrant. On the Ides of March 15, 44 BC, they surrounded Caesar in the Senate house and stabbed him to death. According to tradition, his last words, upon seeing Brutus among his assassins, were "Et tu, Brute? You too, Brutus?" The assassination of Caesar did not restore the Republic. Instead, it plunged Rome into another, even more destructive round of civil wars. The conspirators had failed to account for two men, Mark Antony, Caesar's loyal and charismatic lieutenant, and Gaius Octavius, Caesar's young grandnephew and adopted son, his chosen heir. Antony, through a masterful funeral oration for Caesar, turned the Roman populace against the assassins, forcing them to flee Rome. Octavius, though only a teenager, proved to be a political prodigy, a master of propaganda and political maneuvering. He raised an army, and in a surprising move, initially allied himself with the Senate against Antony. But soon Octavius, Antony, and another of Caesar's generals, Marcus Aemilius Lepidus, reconciled their differences and formed the Second Triumvirate. This was no informal alliance like the first. The Second Triumvirate was a legally constituted three-man dictatorship with the power to make laws and execute citizens without trial. They unleashed a reign of terror, a brutal proscription that saw the murder of thousands of their political enemies, including the great orator Cicero. With their power in Italy secure, they turned their attention to the assassins of Caesar, who had raised an army in the east. At the Battle of Philippi, the Triumvir's forces defeated the armies of Brutus and Cassius, both of whom committed suicide. With their common enemy defeated, the Triumvirate divided the Roman world among themselves. Lepidus was soon sidelined, leaving the two most powerful men in Rome, Antony and Octavian, to face each other in a final struggle for supremacy. Antony went to the east, where he renewed his affair with Cleopatra. Together they ruled as Hellenistic monarchs, a golden couple who dreamed of a new Roman-Egyptian empire. Octavian in Rome proved to be a master of propaganda. He portrayed Antony as a decadent, effeminate figure, bewitched by a foreign queen who had abandoned his Roman heritage. The final showdown came at the Battle of Actium in 31 BC, a massive naval engagement off the coast of Greece. The battle was a decisive victory for Octavian's fleet, commanded by his brilliant general, Marcus Vipsanius Agrippa. Antony and Cleopatra fled back to Egypt, where, a year later, as Octavian's legions closed in, they committed suicide. The death of Antony and Cleopatra marked the end of the civil wars and the end of the Roman Republic. Octavian, at the age of 32, was the sole ruler of the Roman world. The Republic, which had endured for nearly 500 years, was dead. It had been destroyed by the very forces it had unleashed, the ambition of its generals, the vastness of its empire, and the breakdown of its political institutions. The stage was now set for the rise of a new political order, the Roman Empire, and its first and perhaps greatest emperor, Augustus. With the defeat of Antony and Cleopatra, the long and brutal chapter of the Roman civil wars was finally closed. The Roman world, exhausted by a century of strife, yearned for peace and stability. They found it in the unlikely figure of Octavian, the ruthless and cunning young man who had waded through blood to reach the pinnacle of power. But the man who had been Octavian, the revolutionary, now had to become Augustus, the statesman. His challenge was immense: to create a stable political system that preserved the forms of the Republic while concentrating real power in his own hands. In 27 BC, in a masterful piece of political theatre, Octavian appeared before the Senate and announced that he was relinquishing his emergency powers and restoring the Republic. The senators, many of whom owed their positions and their lives to him, were horrified at the thought of a return to the chaos of the late Republic. They begged him to retain his authority, and in a carefully orchestrated exchange, they persuaded him to accept a new set of powers and a new title, Augustus, meaning revered one. This moment marks the traditional beginning of the Roman Empire. The system of government that Augustus created, known as the Principate, was a political masterpiece. On the surface, the Republic continued, the Senate still met, consuls were still elected, and the traditional magistracies continued to function. But Augustus held the real power. He was granted Maius Imperium, supreme military command, and Tribunicia Potestas, the powers of a tribune, which allowed him to veto any act of the Senate and propose legislation. He was the princeps, or first citizen, not a king or a dictator, but the first among equals. It was a fiction, but a brilliant and necessary one, that allowed the conservative Roman elite to accept the reality of one-man rule. Having secured his political position, Augustus turned his attention to the immense task of rebuilding the Roman world. He initiated a massive program of social, religious, and moral reform, aiming to restore the traditional Roman values that he believed had been eroded during the late Republic. He promoted marriage and childbirth, passed laws against adultery, and revived ancient religious cults. He famously claimed that he found Rome a city of brick and left it a city of marble, launching a vast building program that transformed the capital. The Forum was rebuilt on a grander scale, and new temples, theatres, and aqueducts were constructed. Augustus also professionalized the Roman army, creating a standing army of 28 legions stationed on the frontiers of the empire. He established a special fund for veterans' pensions, ensuring their loyalty to the state rather than to individual generals. He created the Praetorian Guard, an elite force of soldiers stationed in Rome, ostensibly as the emperor's bodyguard, but also as a powerful tool for maintaining order in the capital. The reign of Augustus ushered in an era of unprecedented peace and prosperity, known as the Pax Romana, the Roman peace. For over 2 centuries, the Roman world, from Britain to Syria, from the Rhine to the Sahara, was largely free from major conflict. Trade flourished, facilitated by a common currency, a network of excellent roads, and a navy that had cleared the seas of pirates. Ideas and cultures mixed as never before, and the process of Romanization spread throughout the provinces. This was also a golden age of Latin literature. Augustus was a great patron of the arts, and his reign saw the flourishing of poets like Virgil, Horace, and Ovid, and the historian Livy. Virgil's epic poem, the Aeneid, which celebrated the mythical origins of Rome and the destiny of Augustus, became the national epic of the Roman people. But the long reign of Augustus was not without its challenges. The question of succession was a constant source of anxiety. As he had no sons of his own, he was forced to rely on a series of potential heirs, many of whom died prematurely. His beloved daughter Julia was exiled for her scandalous personal life. The final years of his reign were darkened by a military disaster in Germany, where 3 Roman legions under the command of Publius Quinctilius Varus were ambushed and annihilated in the Teutoburg forest. This defeat was a profound shock to Augustus and marked the end of Roman expansion across the Rhine. In AD 14, after a reign of 41 years, Augustus died. His last words were reportedly, "Have I played the part well? Then applaud as I exit." He had played his part brilliantly, transforming a shattered republic into a stable and prosperous empire. He had laid the foundations for a system of government that would endure for centuries. The succession fell to his stepson, Tiberius, a gloomy and capable but unpopular man. Tiberius's reign was marked by a growing paranoia and a series of treason trials that soured his relationship with the Senate. He eventually retired to the island of Capri, leaving the administration of Rome in the hands of the ambitious and ruthless commander of the Praetorian Guard, Sejanus, who was later executed for plotting against the emperor. Tiberius was succeeded by his grandnephew, Gaius, better known by his childhood nickname, Caligula, Little Boots. Caligula's reign began with promise, but descended into madness and tyranny. He was infamous for his extravagance, his cruelty, and his bizarre behavior, which included appointing his horse, Incitatus, as a consul. He was assassinated by members of the Praetorian Guard after a reign of less than 4 years. The Praetorians then acclaimed Caligula's uncle, Claudius, as the new emperor. Claudius, who had been regarded as a fool due to his physical infirmities, proved to be a surprisingly effective and intelligent ruler. He was a great builder and administrator, and during his reign, the Roman Empire expanded to include Britain. His reign was marred by the constant scheming of his ambitious wives, Messalina and Agrippina the Younger. He was eventually poisoned by Agrippina, who cleared the way for her own son to ascend the throne, Nero. Nero's reign is one of the most infamous in Roman history. He began as a popular and enlightened ruler, guided by his tutor, the philosopher Seneca, but his darker impulses soon came to the fore. He had his own mother and his wife executed, and his reign descended into tyranny and paranoia. In AD 64, a great fire swept through Rome, destroying much of the city. Nero, unfairly, was blamed for the disaster, with rumors circulating that he had started the fire himself and played his lyre while Rome burned. To deflect blame, Nero launched the first major persecution of the Christians, a small and misunderstood religious sect, whom he accused of starting the fire. Nero's extravagance and cruelty alienated the army and the Senate. A series of revolts broke out across the empire, and Nero, abandoned by all, committed suicide in AD 68. His death marked the end of the Julio-Claudian dynasty, the family of Augustus, and plunged the empire into another year of civil war. The Pax Romana had been shattered, and the stability that Augustus had so carefully crafted was now in jeopardy.